I'd like to welcome everyone. I see loads of names here. Really, really good to see some of you who I know personally, others who are Judith's contacts. For those who don't know me, I'm Akanksha. I am a senior director leading the climate tech program. And there's one more program called the Digital Utilities Program at GSMA Mobile for Development. I believe you have been in touch with Judith and others from the GSMA, so I will not go on.
I'm just confirming, is it me who can't hear or is it everybody?
That's just you. I can hear perfectly.
Yeah,
it's clear. It's clear for me.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Akanksha. Good to see you.
Yeah, so I probably don't need to give a full talk about what GSMA does and what Mobile for Development does. But what I will say is that we are very excited about climate finance as a topic and finding, the role for digital here and clarifying which modalities actually have a future and where can we most instrumental as a body bringing together mobile network operators and the broader mobile ecosystem. So we're as you can imagine, we are all at a stage where we're just getting started. We're clarifying what's the way forward, and hence this research is more of a landscaping piece. And also to kind of connect with the ecosystem. I know Judith, Edward, Sanjoy, the climate finance experts have already been here, but from the digital side, we are rather, new and still like trying to find our feet. So that's why we are onto this research. I really welcome everyone who has contributed to this research so far and is part of the validation workshop. This is just the start of the conversation and we'll keep it going. I will only be here for the first half of the validation workshop. I'm afraid I have to conduct another interview somewhere, but really nice to see you all, and I would pass it on to whoever next. Maybe Edward, you can take it forward if you're able to hear me. I don't know if you are. Judith, if you can, then over to you.
Yes, I can clearly hear you, so that's fine, and thank you very much for those welcoming remarks. So I would probably ask, or before even I ask, we are going at one point to put you in groups, and we do hope that there will be good conversations within those groups. I will be able to give more instructions when we get to that in terms of how those groups are set up and how far you can be involved in each one of those groups. This is just about wanting us to know from which sector or rather which kind of organization you are representing, so that also it can help us as we go getting insights from your end. It will obviously be very helpful. But that said, as I said in the beginning, the whole essence of this work is to try and see what is the role of mobile technology and digital technology when it comes to climate financing. And maybe, Edna, if you can push on the slides. So that's how we are represented. It seems quite a bit of development partners are with us today. Thankfully, we have a couple of financial institutions, mobile network operators. We would have wanted more, but I think that is also fine. Solution providers. And of course, there is the others. And please feel free to put your comments onto the chat box, so that then we can be able to, and questions and comments should be put into that. But I just wanted, to take this opportunity quickly, to say, when we got into the conversations about climate financing, of course, when it comes to the definition of climate finance, it still seems a little bit of a struggle in terms of understanding what exactly that means. But from our end, it simply refers to those capital flows which will go in terms of helping mitigation, which will help in terms of adaptation, when it comes to climate change. Mitigation in terms of, abating emissions. But when it comes, to adaptation is about those investments or money or financial flows that will obviously go a long way in terms of helping us to manage the impacts of climate change. Again, we went ahead and kind of tried to estimate or kind of to interrogate to get some insights of what climate mitigation, financing would look like. That is financing which would go about, carbon abatement, as I said, energy efficiency, is about transport, is about waste management, and all those elements would feature within climate mitigation. And then we looked at what is climate adaptation, and funds for climate adaptation very clearly is about water, is about, early warning systems, is about environmental assessment. It's also about, marine and fisheries, and how then, we can be able to help communities, and including agriculture, to help communities to be able to deal with the effects of climate change. Then, of course, there is what is not very clear is mitigation, is adaptation, and what then, serves in the two elements, which is about, cross-cutting both adaptation and mitigation. And therefore, it was very clear, for us, what we are defining as climate financing. But I need to confirm that, the insights that you are getting is that it's still not very clear, especially for the practitioners, what, falls under mitigation, what falls under adaptation. And especially when we are talking about the regions that you're investigating, where adaptation becomes, a critical element, there is need for understanding of exactly, what are the funds for which are going for mitigation, what ones are going for adaptation, and with emphasis, for adaptation, because dealing with the effects of climate change is what we see as the biggest component. Having defined, what is of, climate financing, I think the second step that we want to take you through is, what are some of the emerging, elements which were emerging from the conversation. And please note, depending on which sector you are coming from, if you are a development partner, then you'll be able to answer from developing partner. If you are a financial institution, again, we go to our respective sections, and so that then we can see how that is panning out. I mean, as we go through the slides, I think some few emerging, conversation came in terms of the understanding, again, of what is climate financing and how that is structured when it comes, especially for private sector. And it was from the dimensions of, how are they understanding it? One of the biggest, many of our respondents, confirmed that corporate social investments is what then would account for huge amount of, funds for climate financing. Basically, what we are saying is that within the CSI activities of an organization, as we can see there, a case study from CRDB Bank, where they were telling us 1% of their gross profit goes in terms of partnering, with communities to be able to address their social and environmental issues. And therefore, from the bank perspective, is that 1%, accounts for what could then be called, climate financing. Of course, we know where this is going, and it's mainly in terms of grant funding. And yet probably that is, is a misconception that is what, climate funds flow would be for CRDB. Yet we know it's a bigger conversation. So from the understanding of the private sector, there is that group which thinks, corporate social investments, is equal to climate financing. And that, again, is something we are raising a question that clearly we need to make some level of awareness as far as that is concerned. The second part of that conversation, was where it becomes ESG, becomes sustainability. And that's why, it became a little bit interesting, because if indeed an organization can be able to have climate as part of their ESG story and is well embedded within its strategies, then we could be able to see more and more money flowing for climate financing. And a good example, we had that MNO, which was telling us, well, part of their work is to implement within their base stations using renewable energy, within their base stations. And that clearly, equates the investments they are making around that becomes as funds for which is specifically for climate financing. And in this case, for mitigation. So from our perspective, we feel there are more and more organizations that are going to define climate flows through their lenses of sustainability and ESG, which then meant that, we see a lot of promise there because they're embedding it within their business model, which then makes a little bit interesting. If you move on to the next slide, is where we were talking about the conversations about net zero commitments, where, well, we are being informed that because we have made a net zero commitment as an organization and we are putting investments around that, then that could also be, equated as climate financing, and from an internal perspective. And clearly, for instance, we saw GSMA working with JAS, where they are trying, to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. Again, is a welcome, gesture in terms of the internal operations of the organization and trying to capture the climate funds flow. But again, the biggest challenge with all these conversations about, CSI, about sustainability, about net zero, is the fact that, this is mainly for their internal purposes. We haven't seen, a lot of emphasis where these businesses are thinking of developing products which then help, more climate funds to flow, to communities as an example, and in a sustainable way, which then becomes, yes, they are doing good for the purposes of climate, but at the same time, they are doing good business for themselves. So again, that's an area that we feel very strongly that businesses need to be encouraged. If you move on to the next slide, Edna. Then, of course, there was the big discussion about the voluntary carbon market, and this is truly a big promise that we are seeing, and especially with Paris Agreement, Article 6, the conversations that were there in Glasgow last year, but even we expect, probably a bit of that also happening when it comes to COP27. But the truth here is that, we've seen some people commercializing this, and it become, a key theme for us. When we did the research, one of the key themes that is coming out, obviously, is voluntary carbon markets. And there is a scope for us to be able to investigate that a little bit more. And is one of the case studies, one of the deep dives that we'll be taking forward, just to be able to appreciate how the digital and mobile technology can be used in regards to that. But again, this is an area that there is a lot of interest when it comes, to the private sector, when it comes to funds for climate financing, and many people are interested. It's just about, providing the mechanism that will enable them, to be able to achieve that. If you move on to the next slide. So in a nutshell, as I was saying, it's clear climate financing is not well defined. Secondly, the way it is interpreted within the organization, there is still quite a bit that need to be done. And especially when we are saying we need to help to have the private sector developing products. And in fact, even MNOs coming up, with technologies and innovations that will be able, to avail this to more of their communities, but not as a philanthropy, but more as a business, kind of having a business model. Now, in terms of the instrument, we also assess which instruments are being used. And we saw, debt instrument, becoming the most popular kind of instrument that, when it comes, to funds for climate financing, where, banks, other institutions would, and, pay as you go model, because that's also, classified as part of debt, which is being provided to enterprises. We saw that debt is the biggest, component when it comes to the funding. Then risk sharing facilities and guarantees. Again, this became, another popular element and something that, can be explored, and something that, private sector and organization need to be sensitized about, because then it will be able to provide, those risk guarantees and insurance covers that then would be providing, and especially to deal with the consequences of climate change. Then, of course, there is the other big component of grants, and especially connected with the CSIs that I was talking about, is also about thinking about how then the grants could be used and how they are being directed, within the organization. Then finally, the green bonds is also something that we need to explore. At least for now, we don't see quite a bit of, efforts there. But again, there need to be mechanisms where we can be able to have green bonds, and where possible, also use mobile technologies, especially the payment systems, which then can be able to help the uptake of the green bonds when it comes, even to the bottom of the pyramid, if you like. Of course, there is interesting elements that is coming, and elements that are coming as we discuss the instruments. When it comes, to, like, for instance, mobile can be used for payments. It can be used for credit modeling. It can also be used for, where we have platform lending, and especially when I was talking about the bottom of the pyramid. It's also when it comes to the risk sharing and facilities and guarantees, transparency and traceability becomes critical. Development of bankable project. We could use technology to be able to enhance the development of bankable project. And of course, insurance becomes a key element. Crowdfunding is also an interesting area that, that would need to be evaluated, and to see how we can use crowdfunding, especially to crowdfund funding for climate financing. Impact assessment, again, is an area where we know digital and mobile technology can be used, and also credit rating and assessment of any underlying assets. Now that we have the data which is coming, from mobile technologies, that obviously will be helpful in terms of making the instrument to become more bankable, and for us to be able to have more funds for climate change. As we did in terms of the application, and trying to think about where then does digital technology comes in regards to the funds flow and application for the various instruments. It's very clear, we can use the technology, digital technology, we can use mobile technology when it comes to credit modeling. This is one of the biggest problem, especially when it comes to developing countries, to figure out how do you then do credit modeling, especially for, assume you are providing climate financing for farmers. And we are seeing mobile technology, digital technologies, where it's about big data, artificial intelligence becoming a critical element, which can be used, to help come up with new credit, assessment models that then would ensure that money is flowing, to people who otherwise could not have achieved that. Of course, there is also the conversation about the way the lending is done and how the money is delivered. With digital lending and insurance, again, we see tailor-made products that then could be, again, be able to reach to people who could obviously not be able to get that money, and also making the credit that is being provided or the product that are being provided to become more worthy and to guarantee the returns to the people who are providing those products because of the data and because of the information that they can be able to get at the back of the mobile technology. It's also about the development of bankable projects. Traditionally, data, especially for instance, if I'm giving an example of, small scale farmers, this data was not available. Now, with mobile technology, we can be able to co-create that data. And if then we have a good credit modeling system, then things or transactions which was not bankable because of this technology could obviously become bankable. Of course, the whole discussion about mobile payment systems, and especially for climate financing becomes, a big addition, to helping us to get to the funding to where it is required, and also for the purposes of repaying, where we use mobile technology to make the payments, to reach to us who are requesting for those funding, but also more importantly, to reach the people who are providing those funding. And therefore, then it creates the full loop, which then would mean that the transactions become more secured in terms of, and the interest and the appetite becomes more. So it seems like credit modeling, scoring, and rating is becoming, the highest. It's also about the payment systems. Payment system also, is very useful. Impact assessment is 35%. Transparency. Well, thank you so much. I think that was very useful. And, just a couple of, deep dives, kind of insights that we've gotten as we went through this journey, especially when it comes to the delivery of climate finance impact, especially for agriculture and natural resources management. And here we looked at, how can it be used for the agriculture purposes, and of course, this is obviously an interesting area, especially for the African continent, where we want to, to have more climate smart agriculture and have access to the farmers, or other farmers to have access to more climate smart, agriculture funding. And we saw that, the combination between the financing and the insurance industry will be very useful, and digital technologies will be, very helpful when it comes, to, for instance, claim assessment, when it comes to when it comes to the insurance, when it comes to the payment system. It will be very useful to be able to avail the funding. And we do have, an interesting case of Digifarm, where that can be, is an example of how, this technology is being used. But the point, that we are raising here is that, the farmers have had huge challenges when it comes to funding. Not only about funding, but also ensuring that they are not at risk when it comes to climate change issues. Now, the proposal here, or what we observed, is that there could be a possibility where the insurance companies, together with the financing companies, could come together to enable the farmers, of course, through the mobile and digital technology, either first through the provision of the required funding, which in this case doesn't necessarily need to be paid to the farmers. It could be paid, to the suppliers of the farmers, and including the insurance companies. And in case there is failure of crops or anything that happens to the crop as a result of climate change, then the insurance can kick in. And that insurance obviously will be based on, parameters that through IoT, through digital technology, the insurance company can be able to assess, the claims that then could be paid, and therefore could be paid to the financial institutions, so that then we can be able to prevent them from getting losses. And therefore we make our farmers to be in a much better position. So if we move on to the next one, a good example which we saw is in that area is Pura, which is a micro insurance firm, which, as I described, is one which is using, the sensors, is using IoT, is using weather and yield index insurance for the purposes of helping farmers. We saw that they've gone to 1.7 million small-scale farmers across the African continent, which then is de-risking the financial institutions that are providing the funding. And that then means that, they are able to provide, the banks are able to provide the funding, and the farmers are not at a loss, when it comes to the funding. But anyway, the point that I was, kind of raising there is I was giving the case example for Pura, which is a brilliant example on how, digital technology is being used to reach, more and more farmers when it comes to the discussion. Can you still hear the echo, Akansha?
No, it's only when Edna unmutes, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so the other example, around the same, as I said before, is Digifarm. And the way it is working is that, they are providing, kind of extension services to farmers. They are providing financing to the farmers. And this is financing also for the inputs. And now we are seeing an additionality, which is about, also adding insurance into it, and therefore making it a closed loop that then would help to safeguard the farmers, so that then we can be able to reduce the losses that then otherwise they would incur. So that Digifarm is also a good example that we are seeing as a way that, digital technology can be used together with the finance. But one point that, is very clear is that we need kind of an ecosystem sort of thinking. If this is going to happen, it cannot be done by one organization. When you look at Digifarm as an example, it will need to bring together almost a full ecosystem. May it be the insurance providers, may it be the finance providers, maybe it be the, data providers, may it be about, input providers. All this need to be an ecosystem, and truly for it to be able, for digital technologies to be able to work for climate financing, therefore we must have that, sort of orientation that it requires to be an ecosystem based. The second point, as we try to sort out the technology, that is also very important, is that it cannot be plain vanilla. It cannot be the same way that we've done, things before. So therefore, innovation, becomes a critical element, and MNOs must be able to work either with startups, must be able to work with existing organizations to provide innovations, so that then we can be able other innovations that then would allow for efficient, transparent, and effective, transfer of climate financing. So that becomes, a critical element that, innovation is key. But it's also, there's no doubt, which is my third point, reflection point, to say that mobile and digital technology, carries a lot of hope when it comes to climate financing. And therefore, MNOs do have, and I think this is why GSMA is involved in this process and need to be involved even more, to try and figure out, how best can we be able to work with MNOs, so that then they can be able to enable the transfers of climate financing, to the most deserving people, and in a more transparent way. That said, it's very clear that, as I said, it cannot be plain vanilla. It must be, from a kind of, ecosystem way. Of course, the issues about policies also becomes, an interesting perspective, because we've seen also, when we look at across some of the areas, some of the countries that we covered, especially when we are talking about the national banks or the central banks, they also need to have, or rather there is need for a push towards, proper policies that then will be able to enable MNOs to work with, for instance, fintech, for instance, to work with insurance companies to provide the funding, because financing is still a regulated area. when it comes, to most of these countries, and therefore policy making and policy interventions also becomes a critical element as far as this journey is concerned. The other big, conversation that we're having is how then, can we be able to use, and is an area that, is of interest, is about carbon credits and how digital technologies and mobile technology can be used around, having CAVEX as one of the entry point. And, from our conversation, this is obviously one of the deep dives that we'll be able to get into, where we will be exploring how then, without, going to Vera, without going to gold standard, how can we be able to provide a much easier way, that then things like carbon credits for the purposes of, helping the flow of climate financing be used, when it comes to the developing countries. Again, there's some insight. One good example is Power, which is a company operating in Nigeria. We need to bring to bear, the whole about carbon credits, especially for clean cook stoves. And they are using, big data, they're using IoT, they're using, IoT based on sensors that then can be able to be used for the purposes of carbon credits. And that's an interesting area, how then can we be able to, and be able to have that, being accessed by small scale farmers, or rather not small scale farmers, but small and medium enterprises, but at the same time, even startups around that area. I must also note that one of the biggest challenges that we also realized along the way, an area that we are also focusing on is about the MNOs and their, appetite to work with the startups, because some of these ideas, are being generated by startups, and we saw a challenge there, and really for us is to encourage MNOs, to have an open mind when they're dealing with startups, so that then those startups can be accommodated, they can be supported, when it comes to the development of these new, as we said, non-plain vanilla technologies and ideas as far as climate financing is concerned. We've put, one example there in terms of, the whole discussion I was putting about Digifarm, and how that then would be able to work. And I don't want to get into the details of that. Probably what then I can be able to do is talk a little bit about governance of climate financing when it comes to, usage of digital and mobile technology, because that's also another area that we see have a lot of potential. And especially when it comes, to measurement, in terms of estimation of what funds and where they are going. It's also about the reporting of those funds periodically, that we need to report information in regards to climate finance in a transparent way. Again, digital technologies, mobile technologies will be able to give us that possibility, and also to verify. And in fact, this becomes, MRV becomes, a big discussion when it comes to climate financing, monitoring, reporting, and verification. And mobile technology would be very useful, especially so that then there's no doubt in terms of, as I said, governance of the financing, and especially when it comes, to carbon credits, when it comes, to knowing exactly where the money is going. And therefore, there's need also to have, deeper conversations around that. And is one of the areas, again, that we'll be getting in a little bit details when it comes to that. There is also the, I gave the example of power stuff. So again, I don't have to get into the details of that. Recently we have seen GCF, trying to use the whole conversation about, DLTs as a way of governance of climate financing. And this is an example that probably need to be replicated into many other places, specifically when it comes to accountability and providing that trust that is needed, when it comes, to climate flows, ensuring that, we have transparent and effective use of financial resources. That is a key element. Of course, the other area is about the impact assessment and impact measurement, where we will be rather using digital technologies. We can be able to put in the measuring, reporting, and verification of climate actions, and that can obviously be captured within within mobile and digital technologies, and of course scalability, and especially when it comes, to rolling out the transfers, with mobile technology, with digital technologies, there will definitely be much possibility, when it comes to scaling. So from that perspective, we've seen, GCF as a brilliant way how they've been using, DLTs as a way of managing the funds and the transfer of climate financing. Now that said, a couple of, again, observations that we saw is that clearly IoT, pay-as-you-go models are key, becomes key elements when it comes, to this conversation. And climate funding for climate smart agriculture also becomes, an interesting area that we should be able to explore as we go ahead with this assignment. Also, the issue about, carbon credits is another, area that can totally be enabled when it comes to digital technologies. And again, one of the deep dives that we'll be looking into. Of course, there is also the question about gender and climate financing, and exploring a little bit about how that looks like. And in fact, we have one breakout room that, we'll have a conversation around that and how that then should be able to look. I want probably to stop at that point so that then I can be able to allow for a little bit more discussions before we get into the breakout rooms. And Edna, I don't know whether you have access to the chat, or I mean, we can also open our mics and we can take a few comments, a few suggestions, at this point before we get to the breakout rooms.
Yeah, I can say something.
Go ahead, Edwin.
Have you also looked at the possibilities of reducing the let's say the development cost of carbon offset credits? Because one of the big issues in smallholder farmers being able to benefit from carbon offset credits is that the scale is always too small, and that the cost of developing a project is very high. Right? It's like $600,000 to develop the PDD, to get it validated, to do the verifications, etc., etc. So that cost to cut it back. I mean, that's. I don't know how digital technology can help there, but I mean, that is a big issue, right?
Correct.
I mean, I haven't seen many schemes that are applicable and available and affordable to develop small finance carbon offset credits. I mean, the only one I put it in the chat, the only one I've seen is Acorn, and then some rice project in India, but that's already 1,000-hectare schemes, which is not really smallholder farming. And some schemes in South Africa, but they are also enormous pieces of land. So yeah, I mean, that would be an important idea for digital.
Yeah, Edwin, that's a good observation, and indeed one of the areas that we are exploring, and that's probably the reason why we see there is a lot of potential. In fact, there is some cases, like for instance for digital, and we have had some conversations around that, because they are all aimed at how can we be able to allow small scale farmers, as an example, to have access to the CAVEX without necessarily incurring quite a bit of money. So that indeed is an area that we are looking into. And thanks for that observation. Any other observation?
Yeah, I mean, one question I had, Edward, is that if you have to kind of put a map on the innovation, I mean, obviously you've covered a lot of ground here, an incredible amount of ground. But if you have to put a map on the innovation, where do you think the most interesting things are happening?
I think a couple of areas. First and foremost, this whole discussion about CAVEX, from our perspective, is an area where we think that we can be able to push the boundaries in terms of innovations. And I think that's why, it becomes, one of the deep dives that we'll need to look into. Of course, the whole conversation about, pay-as-you-go models is just another big area. Of course, there will be variety of business models around that. but that's also an area that we see there's an opportunity. Of course, IoT, is also another area that probably digital and mobile innovations could also be able to help as far as that journey of bringing more climate financing in place, and through innovation could be a possibility. So those three areas, are areas that, requires, further work and from our perspective.
So DST, sorry, pay-as-you-go, and then the IoT, and the first one I missed. What do you mean by DST?
Well, I meant, around, CAVEX, carbon exchange markets.
Okay.
That's the area that we see a lot of potential. Any other comments, any other suggestions?
Can I speak?
Yes, Dennis, go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at the CAVEX and you highlighting the potentiality that you see in the IoT and related technology. And we know that by all means, they need to have a stable platform. A platform in the sense that the maturity of the technology itself has to be in place. We know we're struggling. I mean, we know how, for instance, the mobile technology has extended and it's growing very fast. Probably, do we have to rely on that to give us a sense that maybe by adopting CAVEX with the case of IoT, it would go ahead and, IoT as per se, including the cases of these farmers or these last mile customers or clients who will be involved on the platform. Now, the existing platforms, again, I don't know what you have to say about that and what findings you see or the possibilities of really pushing this further. Yeah, that's an observation which I see on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dennis. And as I said, of course, we get into the deep dives at a later stage and probably will be able to get even more insights. But one thing I can be able to tell you already at this point is, and that's why the question about ecosystem, and different technologies being put together, for us to be able to, to make sensible products, if you like. And IoT, of course, is one of them, but you cannot, work with IoT on it in isolation. So things like satellite, real-time data will also be added onto that if we are going to validate, some of these carbon credits as an example that you are talking about. And therefore, there will be a, connection of different technologies. And therefore, that's the reason why we need to have deep dives, we have good cases, even at a pilot stage that are working, and hopefully then they can be able to be replicated in other places. So unfortunately, I can't be able to give you a lot of insights at this point until we have gone, through the deep dives.
Thank you, Edward.
Edward, still on carbon credits, and I know there's a lot of discussion around what CAVEX can do, but I wanted to ask you, do you see now the big players, the Vera, all these standards, do they have appetite for technology, and what does it take to, for us to convince them that it's the easier and cheaper route than the traditional way of doing it as we know it today?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, is about, for instance, is the verification, the reporting. All those are the challenges, and that's why you have to incur so much money to be able to put those systems in place. But now we are talking about new ways through digital, and I can tell you, there is still some resistance. And until we are able to prove through these technologies that we are proposing here, that, monitoring, verification, and reporting is in place, and people are, confident that, through technology, we are able to, obviously, to be transparent, and we can be able to show clearly how those, carbon credits are packaged. Now, if we are able to do that, probably then they will be interested. But I think, the biggest challenge have been that we have been looking at things from a traditional way. Now with, for instance, for our digital as an example, this is new phenomena. And probably we'll go all the way, even creating for markets for those carbon without, going gold standard, without going Vera. And that hopefully then will solve the problem. Hopefully they will join the bandwagon at a later stage because this is technology and nobody can stop technology. But at this point, we do not have that indication, Michael. Welcome back. I think we are all back. And I will want group one. I guess that is Dennis. Dennis, for now, please give us insights, that are coming from your conversations. And, you have 4 minutes to do that.
Sure. Thank you very much, Edward. You came in the group and Rena, but you were frozen. I think you're scared of the blockchain. So the insights from the blockchain, we're looking at the question. We had actually 3 questions, and that is, the role of the blockchain itself, and those specific enabler in the climate finance, and how we would see that its access and deliverability could really get out to the vulnerable communities. And again, what are those challenges and barriers? So what we came up from the chart is the first thing we look at the 2 marrying parties. That's the traceability that the blockchain as a database provides. And that is a claim from the climate finance, this traceability. And we know how transparent the blockchain really enables that. So that is one interesting side. But now, if you go further into that, well, if then that's the traceability and all that, and now we look at the flow of the climate finance. Phil, you may add on that if kind of forgotten. So we look at it in this structure that how we're taking the angle from these vulnerable communities that will be involved. And the very good example we are considering, like the CAVEX, looking at like maybe the gold standard, which is trying to integrate those small projects, these are the final people, and then see how it flows and eventually it will enable that. And highlighting on some of these technologies, which we mentioned, the IoT, which are still part of that CAVEX. Now, if you look at that, and the thing is, for it to enable that, then these vulnerable communities and all other parties, definitely their activities need to be involved. Now, they need to be involved under the different platforms which will be there. So for instance, if you're mentioning the platform, the IoT, then yeah, that's something we are not much concerned of that, because we've seen how the costs have been getting down, and probably they can adopt that, considering the adoption of the IoT and its technology embedded into the certain schemes, then probably that will be okay. So now we get to that, okay, now, why not other databases? That's a question if we are comparing, and the thing comes in the cost. So it's not just about blockchain, but what about the cost? The cost that you're gonna incur in the flow of the transactions, and the cost that you're gonna incur in putting up the blockchain itself. So that is a debate on that. So it now comes back to, if you look at, again, the gold standard, which you are looking at the CAVEX, and seeing, and now I'm bringing the case that we are taking it on a national scale. So beginning it from a national scale, and then we put it kind of on a way out to see for the different platforms that we have, that we are trying out, for instance, the blockchain and all other, the IoT and in the different schemes, and seeing which one works well. So you cannot be a guarantee that blockchain will work or other databases. But again, you're also weighing out with those other schemes, because eventually we want that transparency, the easy flow of the digital finance to the final users, and the fact that we are monitoring real time, then to have that way. So that was kind of the debate which we had on that, and I hope it makes some sense, and we can be able to take up some questions, or you can have some recommendations. Thank you. Edward, back to you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Let's move on to the insights from Group 2, and the chair of Group 2, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much, Dr. Mungai. So My name is Madeline. I was in the group breakout group 2, and we were looking at emerging technologies and asking ourselves. So within our group, there's Ramzan, that's an environment manager who disburses finance in Pakistan through an app called Jazz Cash. And I was also with Chris. Chris has developed payment methods that reach smallholder farmers. Myself, I'm involved in enabling climate finance through adaptation mechanisms, and we use fintech, we use data and technology to score risk and then follow it up with finance and test that the finance is indeed getting paid back because the farmer is resilient to climate change. So the first question that the group had to tackle had to do with, do we really think that fintech and insurtech are the next big frontiers in the access and delivery of climate finance? And we resounded a big yes, there's no other way. And we also discussed the competitive advantage of then having fintech and insurtech in climate finance. So we spoke about scale. So there's where brick and mortar can reach, there's where feet on the street can reach. Digital has no limit. And so, we agreed that indeed, fintech and insurtech and climate finance build scale, enable scale. And we also discussed about the cost benefit aspect of less cost for more benefit. And then the other question that we asked ourselves is, therefore, what is the role of MNOs in enabling fin and insurtech? And so apart from, enabling more connectivity in far-flung areas, we agree that indeed MNOs are the building blocks and the cornerstone of fintech and insurtech. I think it's a role that can be assumed to be a side aspect, but it's really a cornerstone and a building block when you really think about it. And so the last issue that we tackled is, therefore, what are some of the challenges that fintechs and insurtechs face in the access and delivery of climate finance? And we spoke about digital literacy being one of them, and then said, possibly one of the ways to then give MNOs a bigger role to play in enabling fin and insurtech is actually, can they also drive, the literacy that's required at a very basic level as a larger, more rounded role and responsibility. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madeline. Let's, Anna, did you actually have discussions on did you have discussions within, I can see your group was 2 people, and Anna, who was the chair of that group?
Tim was our key lead. We also had Sanjoy join us for a period before he moved to another one. So I will hand over to Tim, who had lots of very interesting points to share on this.
I'm sorry, I just had a little network problem. I'm back. Yeah, we primarily discussed MRV for private and public sector, and what also the different requirements are, and the different options for digital MRV. So one issue that, I personally encountered in the public sector especially, is that governments usually need PDFs to process, like printable PDFs, at least quarterly, or annually, that they can put on paper and file off somewhere. So no matter how data intensive and how powerful our digital MRV gets, if we can't get a printable PDF at the end, it's probably not compatible with government procedures. And while most governments are working on digitalization, I don't know, maybe the Chinese are there, or maybe the Koreans, but at least all European governments I'm aware of still need that PDF. In the private sector, that's different. And at least for gold standard, I'm also aware that they are investing heavily into a end-to-end digital process for the carbon markets. Another thing we touched on is the possibility to verify digital data, which also can be really critical. So, and there one option is basically the secure hardware environment approach, where the hardware you're using is basically the user doesn't have root access to the hardware. So it's kind of like the iPhone approach, where the ultimate control over the device lies with Apple and not with the user. But most phones out there are Androids where users have root access, so you can't inherently trust all the data that comes off these phones because they are in principle manipulable. And it's also extremely difficult to verify that they haven't been manipulated later on. So we can try to either go with data formats that are particularly difficult to falsify. Video is the primary example where it's possible to falsify, but it's impossible to falsify in a non-detectable way. And it's also very expensive to falsify. And we can work with triangulation. So we can, for example, compare satellite images to the reporting from the ground that's been using mobile phone technology. So, and then see if that's a roughly matching. In that discourse, we also always have to remind ourselves that the old and existing systems for MRV are really bad, and they are also manipulable. So just when it starts with the project developer takes a random sample, already there you can start manipulating by taking a non-random sample. And it's impossible to verify that if that has taken place or not. Anna, did I miss anything important?
We also talked about the role for smallholder farmers, or some of the benefits for smallholder farmers.
Oh yeah, that's actually a big one that's particularly important to me personally, that very often the carbon market transactions happen over a gigantic power gap. So it's a smallholder farmer selling to a oil corporation, a transnational oil corporation usually. So, and often in the current environment, it's a take it or leave it offer. So this smallholder farmer either participates on the terms that are already defined, or they don't participate at all. In a digitalized environment, smallholder farmers could have access to pitching their same offer to several buyers, and therefore, ideally, a more digitalized and end-to-end digital, especially, marketplace could allow to change the negotiation power there. And it's something I've already observed under Article 6 negotiations, that the sellers actually have a better negotiating position than they had in the past. Because at the moment, the market is short and all the buyers are struggling to get quality credits. So we are seeing that shift already. And I think it will only get more. And if we can use digital platforms for farmers to directly compare the offer they're getting from, I don't know, Nestle and BP, then at least they can play different buyers against each other, which currently they can't because they always have to go through intermediaries. So that is also a very interesting perspective that might realize in the future. I haven't seen that yet, but it might be in the way forward when we actually get an end-to-end digital process. So that's it from my side.
Thank you so much, Tim. And then we can move to group 4, which is IoT and pay-as-you-go.
Yeah, hi, hey Edward, great to see you again. Hope you can hear me and see me. And so we were the team working on the pay-as-you-go model and IoT potential for carbon financing. And I'm happy to note that we had 2 participants from the mobile network operators who happen to be sitting, right into the IoT itself. Internet of Things requires their own, but the ecosystem to be well supported from an internet perspective. So we also had another participant who's a researcher, and one of the things that really came out conspicuously in our room was there is the potential of carbon financing, and there is the potential to scale pay as you go in conjunction with IoT, but it has not matured to the level that the mobile network operators are anticipating. So in essence, coming from the discussions that we've seen on the African continent, we have a lot of pay-go services running in the energy sector. Quite a number of startups, quite a number of companies have already set up services. But then the mobile network operators still feel there's just a huge opportunity that has not been exploited yet. But even as we look at that, in terms of the financing itself, one of the participants really brought a very good point, that it would be great to observe if the real beneficiaries of the finance gets the money at the end of the day, because there's pretty much a disconnect in terms of the sources of the funds to the end groups of people who are meant to use these finances. So there's also the challenge of, much as there's a blueprint that looks at the net zero towards the 2050, there's also a challenge of just the understanding of the climate financing itself, as you had alluded earlier on. But one researcher counted back and said climate financing has really existed for, I mean, the whole concept is mature at this point, and the concept is well understood by, I would say, groups from other places, but not as much in other places as well. So in this case, it means if that checkbox needs to come out clearly to really understand and help now the mobile network operators, and know how to play into the whole ecosystem of the financing. Now, but there's also the component that is clear, is as we talk about the climate financing, there's also the sustainability of the business that need to come out of this. And mobile network operators, I think, much as they would like to participate in the conversations for mitigation and adaptation, they also need to point out clearly if they're in for the money or they really want to support the initiatives as well. And that became very conspicuous from a point of the current developments or activities that are pushing for climate financing through PayGo and IoT are largely led by the public initiatives. So there's very little from private sector trying to push that as well. And that, I think, mobile network operators, so that it's quite a gap as well. And just looking at part of my final notes, the recommendations that came out of the room was, we need to push for more collaboration. So collaboration is not existing to the level of the technology providers, the mobile network operators seeing their play in the ecosystem, and then the users of the whole pay-as-you-go combined with IoT technology. And then we need to also have a proper definition of the sectors within which the technologies can play to be able to leapfrog the adaptation initiatives. So there's quite a number of things to talk in there, but I'm thinking that the sessions was a bit short, and we definitely look forward to hearing more recommendations and sharing more after the call, even after the call. Thanks.
Thanks, Ronald, for that. Let's go to the last one, which is gender and climate finance, and quickly spend 3 minutes to share with us the findings out of that.
Great, thanks, Edward. I'm happy to report back. I'm Chantal Barrett from KCIC Consulting. So we had a small group. It was myself, Elsie from Plan International, Leila from GSMA, and then Sanjoy joined us as well a little bit. I think, I mean, we didn't really get through all 5 questions. We spent a fair bit of time on the first one, which is what is the intersectionality of gender and climate finance? And then we sort of briefly touched on the second part, which is, what is the role of mobile money in climate finance? And I think, when we look at the intersectionality, there's one of the key questions is what climate finance is actually going to girls and women? And I think to start with that question is quite sensible. And it links back to the point that several people made, and the point you made, Edward, at the beginning, in terms of what is climate finance, whether it's the government to government flows or whether it's the private financing, which is the area that I'm particularly involved in. And so if we look at the different flows of climate finance, within those flows, what's happening and how much is actually going to women and girls. So that was we spent a bit of time talking about that. And I'll come on to that bit in the context of the 2X collaborative as well. The second point that came out was, again, something similar that's been said, is that there's a connect between what's going on at the global level and the local level, whether that's in terms of understanding the different sources of climate finance at the global level, and then how they're filtering down at the national level, and then from that at the very local level. And I think there continues to be that disconnect there. We talked a fair bit about data and the sort of eternal lack of data in this space, particularly when we look at climate finance and gender disaggregated data. That continues to be very patchy, so it's very difficult to answer the first question that we set out. But it's really critical, and it's an area of focus, because until we get the gender disaggregated data and really understand what amount of climate financing is going to women and girls, it's very difficult to do something about it. We then sort of touched on the role of mobile money in climate finance. And I think one of the points that Sanjay was raising was a good one and a key one, which is that entrepreneurs that are gender smart, so that's either women-led entrepreneurs or those that are working with a gender lens, are cut up from mainstream financing. And this is something that we see from our work in the 2X Collaborative. So I'm an advisor to the 2X Collaborative, which is an industry initiative set up by the DFIs and the MDBs, but it's now a much broader initiative. And one of the key sort of objectives of the initiative is to work with private financiers to drive more money in a gender smart way. We do that using the 2X criteria. So it's not just about women-led businesses, but it's about businesses and entrepreneurs that either have a product or service that disproportionately impact women or have gender smart boards, etc. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to look at the nexus of climate finance and gender. So the group had launched a toolkit last year at COP, which is looking at the why, what, and how of climate finance within the world of private finance across different sectors. So agriculture is clearly a key one. And that's our attempt at defining the nexus and saying, how can we channel the flows of financing that is going from DFIs, MDBs, and other impact investors in a way that is climate smart, but also gender smart. So let me just leave it there. There was a number of other things. I don't know if Leila or Elsie, if there were any key points I missed, but that was the gist of our conversation.
It was good. I have nothing to add to that, unless Elsie or Sandra.
It's fine, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much for that, summary and conversations. And I think, from where I sit, I see a couple of things coming or emerging themes which are emerging, from the conversation. First and foremost, it's very clear that, we cannot have these technologies in isolation. For sure, pay as you go, IoT, blockchain, we are talking about fintech, insurance tech, all these things will have to work together. So for sure, we cannot have them work in isolation. And I think that's a thing which is running across all the groups. I think the other thing that I hear, is about traceability of funds. And as we go through these technologies, as we use, digital and mobile technology, traceability and, talking about the governance becomes, a critical element that, digital and mobile can be able to provide us. And of course, there is a conversation about MNO and their role when it comes, to climate financing. Clearly, that is set out. Of course, there is a discussion about the challenges, for instance, digital, awareness and literacy. That obviously is an area that can be driven by MNOs to a further level despite the challenges. But clearly there is a room for MNOs to help us to get more climate financing flowing to where it is really needed. I think there is also the conversation about gender and bringing in gender, just also to make sure that as we put money for climate financing to we need that gender lens when it comes to the conversation. And clearly, there is quite a bit of, themes that are emerging from the conversation, and really thankful, for the fact that you have been able to share, your thoughts as far as those are concerned. There are many things that I've written down, but unfortunately, time is not on our side. And I would like, to take this opportunity probably to ask Anna to say just a few things before then we can be able to close the session. Anna.
Thank you, Edward. Yes, just a final huge thank you from us, the GSMA team, for your time and all of your insights today. There was so much to cover and there is much still to discuss. So if you would like to share any other thoughts with us, then please get in touch either on email or we can set up a call, but we would love to hear from you. And thanks again and enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Thank you so much, Anna, for those final remarks. And I really is to appreciate all of you. And I really apologize for the technology hitch that we went through, as we went through this. And very thankful for your insights. So thank you very much, and look forward to hearing further comments from your end. And feel free to send us those comments. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you,
thank you.
everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.